The economy is in sharp focus today, especially as second quarter GDP figures show at least a 51% contraction.
It will take a lot to kickstart the economy. One of the key ingredients is going to be a stable energy supply. The Eskom CEO, Ruyter, joins us now. Mr. Ruyter, good evening to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time on the pulse. We've had load shedding this week, not as bad as we thought it was going to be. What's your outlook for the next few weeks for load shedding in Eskom?
So we've indicated in our latest power update that there is a probability of stage 1 load shedding from 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon until 10 o'clock tomorrow evening. I think that we are getting better stability from our units right now, but the Eskom generation system has a way of keeping you humble in terms of making forecasts. So unfortunately there remains a residual risk, which we're obviously trying to avert by catching up with the overdue maintenance.
There's been an assertion, Mr. Ruyter, that the data that Eskom is giving us on the day-to-day is in fact not an honest reflection of the amount of load shedding that you're actually undertaking as an entity, and that on some days will be on stage 2 perhaps, when we should in fact really say we're on stage 4 of load shedding. Speak to us about that particular issue that has been raised, and I'm sure you're well aware of it now.
Yes, I think that's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the relevant rules that apply. So there's a rule called NRS 048-9 that stipulates exactly how the stages of load shedding are defined. Now, in shorthand, people very often say that 1,000 megawatts equals to 1 stage of load shedding, but actually it's a little bit more complicated than that, in that the true number is determined by about a 5% reduction in load that we apply to our customers, including the municipalities. And because they then have to keep certain of their customers, such as hospitals and so forth, supplied, the actual amount is likely to exceed. And of course, percentage-wise, as we then see greater demand coming through, then the amount of megawatts that are shed per stage of load shedding will increase. So I would suggest that to those people who have a lack of confidence in our data, we have recently announced that we are going to be launching a new website that will be accessible to the public, where all of this data will be available. But if you choose to interpret the data, just make sure that you also understand the rules by which you need to interpret the data.
You've been speaking over the last 24 hours about another year of load shedding, and I must say, in a way, your predictions are keeping to the timetable. 6 months ago, you were talking about 18 months of load shedding. What kind of picture do you expect us to be looking at in a year's time? When you say the risk of load shedding will be less then, how much less? Will it be consistent? Do you expect to have a much more stable supply of electricity?
We are certainly trying our best to catch up with the overdue maintenance. I visited 3 power stations yesterday, and the picture is pretty much consistent across the board, in that the midlife refurbishments that were supposed to have been carried out to ensure that the power stations can operate until the end of their life with a great degree of reliability, those were deferred and not done when they should have been done. The consequence of that is that our plant is not reliable. So we are trying to catch up. This will cause us to ramp up the amount of megawatts that we take off for maintenance, and because of the lack of reliability of the remainder of the system, of course, that then leads us to a greater risk until we complete the reliability maintenance program. But I think it's also fair to point out that South Africa should start procuring additional generation capacity. And it's for this reason that Eskom is restructuring itself. We believe that there's a good opportunity for us to attract new private capital into the generation area. And we think that with the right regulatory environment, this can be achieved in a matter of 2 to 3 years. So we think that that is the right way forward to put an end to load shedding on a permanent basis.
Sure. Let's just maybe unpack what this restructuring then of Eskom looks like, especially under you as the CEO, because there have been great questions about what exactly that will mean. And perhaps to add on to the question, this emergency power that government has said it will now embark on getting. What do you know about it? Can you tell us more details, and how involved is Eskom going to be in that process?
So Eskom is the designated buyer. So we purchase the electricity from the party that a contract is concluded with by the IPP office. Now, the IPP office reports into the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. And we have been requesting for greater involvement in that procurement process in order to ensure that by the time that the finalized negotiated contract reaches Eskom, that it has a higher probability of passing the scrutiny of our board. And our board obviously have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that Eskom does not enter into onerous contracts. So I think we can expedite the purchase of emergency power through greater involvement of Eskom in that process.
Mr. Ruyter, I just want to build on Kathy's point a little bit, and she was talking about the emergency procurement process. We expect, as I understand it, government has said to people who want to be involved in that they would need to have their power up and running within 2 years' time. Right? I accept that. You were talking about an end to load shedding in a year's time. So what's going to happen between that year? Why is it that we would still need that emergency power procurement if you think, and I realize, as you said, the system has a way of humbling you. I fully accept that. Why is it then that you say we might have an end to load shedding in a year's time when that emergency procurement power is only supposed to come online in 2 years' time?
Stephen, the system is not static. The system changes, and we have, as per the IRP 19, a retirement schedule for our plants where we are going to take out of commission in a staggered way over the next 10 or so years about 8,000 to 10,000 megawatts, and this needs to be replaced. So hence my statement that we should start looking into the procurement of additional generation capacity, not only because the system will require it, but also from an environmental perspective. In order to make the Eskom system compliant, we're required to spend about 60 billion rand over the next decade, which we don't have. And if we can avoid that by making available more environmentally friendly energy sources, then of course that is a win-win.
Sure. Mr. Ruyter, I just want to go back to a part of the question that I'd asked earlier about the restructuring processes at Eskom. And of course, all of it comes under a climate where the country's economy is under immense pressure. So when we talk the issue of restructuring at Eskom, right now, what are the conversations that you're having, and what does it effectively look like from this point onwards, maybe for the next year, given the kind of resources you may not necessarily be able to access within that period too?
So restructuring in the corporate world typically takes 3 to 4 years, just judging by some benchmarks. We are trying to pursue a very aggressive timeline. We are doing our utmost to accelerate this process because we believe that the separation in particular of our transmission business into a so-called ITSO, which is an independent transmission and system operator company, which is the global benchmark for how these things are set up, that will be a key enabler to attract additional private capital into the generation sector. So we are approaching our board on the 16th, as a matter of fact, for permission to register a new subsidiary, which will then house this new transmission entity. It's not as straightforward as you would expect in a private company. We then need to get approval from the Department of Public Enterprises as well as from National Treasury. And provided we get all of these regulatory approvals in place in time, we believe that by the end of next year, we will have a wholly owned subsidiary, by and large, able to operate as an independent power procurement entity under the Eskom umbrella.
So the bulk of it falls under the separation of Eskom into different entities. Does it all apply to potential also reduction of the staff at Eskom, especially when you look at the current challenges that are facing the country's economy? So realistically, is Eskom going to continue into the next year with its full staff complement that it has on board right now?
So about a year ago, we had a staff complement of 46,000 employees. Through natural attrition, voluntary severance programs and so forth, we've been able to reduce that already to 44,000. And we are on a glide path down to around about 38,000 employees in 5 years' time. Now, that we want to achieve without resorting to forced retrenchments. We believe that that is a way that we don't want to go, and we've given commitments and assurances to organized labor in that regard. But we do believe that we can achieve this restructuring in a way where we can transfer employees into this newly created entity through what is known in labor law as a Section 197, and that will not lead to job losses.
Mr. Ruyter, I do want to ask a little bit about your debt, and then there's also been developments around the Mujabeng municipality in Welkom, where Eskom has actually attached their main account of the municipality. Now, I fully understand why I imagine you felt you had to do this, because they owe you a huge amount of money. I'm sure that they reneged on agreement after agreement before you actually did that. But it is an extreme move to attach a municipality's bank account. Are you expecting to do that more often?
I think the political leadership in South Africa, from the President to the Deputy President to Minister of Finance and other ministers, have been abundantly clear that we need a culture of payment in South Africa. People need to pay for services that they receive, and that includes the municipalities. And where we have municipalities that have been delinquent in not paying us, and the total outstanding debt is now approaching 30 billion rand that we are owed. And if you look at the overall Eskom debt, of course, we can't afford to carry this amount of bad debt on our books. We need to resort to traditional debt collection mechanisms. So we've attached movable assets in the case of Mfuleni municipality. We've attached a bank account in Maluti Apufong, and now we've attached another bank account in Mujabeng. And we think that this is the way in which we can ensure that we do get paid, because we are interdicted by law from cutting off electricity supply completely, as we would do to a non-paying residential or business customer.
And that means then you're going to continue to take a hard line in Soweto. I mean, we're seeing some areas, in the Pimville area, for example, people are moving out of their properties because you won't switch the electricity back on. You won't switch the electricity back on. You won't replace the transformers there because people haven't paid. You've got low payment rates of under 5%.
And again, it's a question of having to pay for services. You know, Stephen, we, over the next few weeks, have to replace in Gauteng alone some 455 transformers and mini-subs. A transformer costs 80,000 rand, a mini-sub costs 350,000 rand. And the reason that we have to replace them is that they are damaged by overloading due to illegal connections and electricity theft. So if we don't have assurances that the infrastructure can be properly protected, we have to resort to something that we call load reduction, which is the selective targeted reduction of electricity supply to areas where our infrastructure is at risk.
One of the things that has always been put on the table, especially from business, is the idea perhaps of having a more scheduled load shedding timetable that business can know to prepare for and plan for. And the same thing is coming out of South Africans more and more. Yes, people want to be able to keep the lights on all the time, but if that can't happen, they want to at least know that next week, Tuesday, at 9 o'clock, I won't have electricity, so that I can plan my life around that. Is Eskom working towards getting the country there in the absence of being able to provide electricity?
We completely understand that need for greater predictability. And if the challenge that Eskom faced was a challenge of a lack of available capacity, but with a reliable system, then that would be an ideal solution in order to have rotational load shedding on a predictable basis. Unfortunately, we don't have a predictable system. And that leads us to a situation where if we have unplanned, unexpected breakdowns, that we have to implement load shedding at relatively short notice. And this is a consequence of our endeavor to keep the lights on for as long as possible in order to maintain service to the South African public when we have the generation capacity available. So it's really an outcome of the state of the system rather than the total overall available capacity.